All right, it's 5:33 on Thursday, February 3rd. We're here to start the Equity Task Force Committee meeting of Urbana School District 116. Roll call, please, John.
Dr. Ivory Tatum.
Here.
Paul Plowski.
Here.
Brandon Caffey.
Present.
Lori Exum.
Present.
Adriana Ochoa.
Here.
Beth Ladd.
Here.
Brian Oglowski.
Here.
Carol Baker.
Here.
Dion Webster.
Here.
Elizabeth Smith Andre.
Here.
Lupe Ricconi.
Here.
Joe Wiemelt.
Here.
Katie Madigan.
Yes, present.
Kim Norton.
Here.
Nate Wall.
Here.
Sherry Gittens.
Here.
Erica Uskali.
Here.
Tanya Deacon.
Here.
Tom Majors.
Here.
Kersha Kasim.
Here.
Yvonda Smith.
Here.
Shauna Shearer.
Here.
And I think, is there anyone I missed?
I'm here, Todd Taylor.
And I think Angie came in after you started.
Yep, I'm here too, John. Sorry.
Yep. And John Gutzmer is also here.
Right, thanks. Is there a motion to accept tonight's agenda by acclamation?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any opposition to accepting tonight's agenda? We'll accept it. If not, we'll assume that everyone's voting yes. Great, thank you very much. Citizen statements. There are two citizen statements that were emailed into the district. I will read them both. The first is from Yuli Barishnikov. Dear members of the Equity Task Force, my comment pertains to the selection of the vendor for equity audit, agenda item 5.1. I envision the administration of the district will try to rush the decision process after having canceled previous two meetings. Please have in mind this. Firstly, if they say we need to do something, then point to something and say, this is something, let's do it. This is a fake syllogism. You have to do what is right, not choose from a few limited options. Secondly, there is no clear agreement in the administration and the board what the audit process actually aims at. Abstract theorizing padded by irrelevant statistical tables shouldn't be the outcome. We need to look at very specific failures of the district and at very specific solutions. Lastly, when the administration says that there is a very limited supply of people able to do statistical analysis or educational planning, they are clearly somewhat misinformed. There is a huge public research university just a mile away with scores of highly trained people willing to help. Sincerely, Yuli Barishnikov, Urbana. The second is from Ruth Kantorovitz. Dear members of the Equity Task Force, regarding item 5.1 on the agenda, I would like to know if the Equity Task Force is aware that a group of experts from the University of Illinois has offered the district to conduct an equity audit for free. The UIUC group has access to any area of expertise contained in the private consulting firm's proposals presented so far, and much more. The UIUC team has resident experts in data science and operational research from the College of Engineering and the departments of mathematics and statistics, as well as support from the College of Education. I think the task force should at least consider this opportunity for a collaboration with the university. Our district can only gain from it. At the very least, the district should give the UIUC team equal access to the data that they would give to the external contractors it considers. Sincerely, Ruth Kantorowicz. And I believe that's everything we've received. The first topic tonight is equity audit consulting firm update. Dr. Caffey.
Good evening, everyone. For the benefit of those who were not present for the board meeting the other night or did not tune in via Zoom, I have emailed the Equity Task Force a summary of the two presenters. Within my memo to the task force, I indicated that it's imperative that everyone reviews the links that will be sent out to those presentations so that everyone can be properly informed about what each consulting firm offers, their strengths and their weaknesses, so that we can reconvene, hopefully in a short time frame, and have more adequate debate about who we may ultimately recommend to the Board of Education for approval, or if we need to bring other consultants forward for consideration. And so I won't bore you all or take up unnecessary time trying to read through the memo, since everyone knows how to read. But if you have any questions for me at this point in time, I'll be happy to answer those questions. Otherwise, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. President.
So did everybody get a chance to look at sorry, Paul, did you want to say something else before?
Go for it, please.
Okay. Did everybody, I shared the YouTube link. So I don't know if you had a chance today to watch the video from last night. It feels like we're in a movie sometimes. But so the board meeting last night, and as I shared with you yesterday, the public documents that were shared for both presenters. Unfortunately, we did not have their PowerPoints. Those were not shared with us. So that's why it was kind of important to watch it via the board meeting, because we didn't have access to those PowerPoints to share those with you. Unfortunately, we just had the one-pagers that are on the website and that you guys got as attachments. Earlier today, Dr. Caffey shared Dr. Dubiel's PowerPoint from November, as well as her proposal. So the discussion last night, just to summarize at the board level was, and if you had a chance today to look at all three, so we have the EIS group, which several board members really did I guess, gravitate to Dr. Lewis's presentation. He definitely has experience doing equity audits. He definitely has a lot of experience with the quantitative aspect of the audit, which is something that is very important to the board. Several of our board members right now, not as much experience with the qualitative, I felt like, but Dr. Caffey and I Zoomed yesterday, and we feel like if that's the person that we go with, then we will need to talk with him about the qualitative piece. You know, I really don't want that to fall back on us as a district, just because that's something that he's not as, I'm not going to say not capable of doing. I'm sure he's capable of doing, he's just not done it as much. And then we had the Equity Imperative, who I really appreciated their presentation. There were a lot of good things that I thought came out of it. They were really honest and shared that they have not done the equity audit piece in terms of a full scope statistical analysis, and that their work lends more toward the professional development. I was really interested in the aspects of the anti-racist curriculum that they were talking about, some of the culturally relevant lenses. So I feel like they bring probably more of that qualitative lens, as well as a PD piece. And I think they would really help us write a really strong equity implementation plan. But the statistical piece is brand new for them. And then we also have Dr. Dubiel, who, as we know, we discussed her. She's got a lot of experience doing these audits in the state of Illinois. And there has been some concerns with her model and the fact that many of her proposals are very similar. And we've kind of talked about that at the board level too. So at this point, we just really, Dr. Caffey and I really just wanted to open it up for discussion. Like Brandon said, you guys hopefully have read his memo. We'll put that memo on the website too. It really is just a summary of Tuesday night's meeting. So, you know, nothing that can't be shared. And if you had a chance to watch the meeting, at this point, we just want to get your thoughts as a group. We did tell the board that because there was quite a bit of interest in the EIS, Dr. Lewis, this was something that came out at the meeting, which concerns me, and I think I could speak for Dr. Caffey, concerns him too, that we don't have a tangible product that we can look at. I think a lot of the criticism that we received around Dr. Dubiel was because a lot of her audits are on websites and readily available, and school districts work with her and post their work. But for the other two presenters, we really don't have anything to look at. We don't have a, you know, it's going to be hard to spend that kind of money and that time and invest that much into someone without having an opportunity to see their work. So Dr. Caffey and I, on request of the board, he's going to reach out to different equity directors that Dr. Lewis has worked with. He said he would share some names of some of the districts. He is from North Carolina, so I'm hoping we can find some local, if not local around our area, but at least in the state of Illinois that we can talk to. We'll reach out to superintendents. We may not be able to tangibly see a finished product, but at least we can talk with districts about the relationship and about just the experience of working with him, which is important to us. I mean, that qualitative piece is very important, I think, to, you know, a lot of us in this group as educators. What else, Brandon? Anything else before we kind of discuss, or we get your thoughts?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Again, just to kind of reiterate, I think when I initially started working with the different directors of DEI throughout the state, one of the components that was very important to us as a school district was someone that we could actually build and establish a close relationship with, someone who would be willing to come to Urbana and kind of have that boots on the ground approach to helping us go through this equity audit. We know we would have that in Dr. Dubiel through our conversations with her. I believe we would also have that with the equity imperative, especially with Mr. Rodriguez being based out of Chicago and Mr. Morris having roots from Chicago. Maybe a little bit more challenging with Dr. Lewis being in North Carolina. I didn't get a clear indication that he would be willing to come on site. That would be something I would have to follow up with him about. If he'd be willing to come on site and do some of this work with us, or if everything would be via Zoom and other means of communication. So there's a lot of different points that we need to take in consideration as we recommend an auditor, but we want to make sure that it's someone that's very specific to our needs as a school district and not just looking at one component, be it a quantitative analysis versus a qualitative analysis versus this or that. It needs to be something that broaches the whole scope of what we need for our school district.
Thanks, Brandon. And the other thing that we talked about, and I kind of feel like came out from the board members as well, is maybe there is a way that we could enter into some kind of hybrid, if that might be something. I definitely would like your thoughts on that. I think as a group, and we're going to talk about this as 5.2, but you know, we would be serving in the role of kind of the district equity leadership team. And, you know, I don't know how hard would it be for us to have to work with two different people. So if we did do some kind of hybrid and we worked with Dr. Lewis on the quantitative piece, and then either worked with Dr. Dubiel or the equity imperative on the qualitative piece, you know, what would that look like? I mean, how would we get a finished product that would kind of mesh? So.
Yeah, well, I would be certainly open to that concept, especially listening to the responses of the board members and what Dr. Lewis said that he could offer in terms of the quantitative. I have not had those discussions with him or any of the other potential auditors if they would be willing to do a hybrid, but it's something I could certainly follow up with the 3 candidates that we have thus far to see if that would be a possibility. And in such case, I would assume that we would explore doing the quantitative first and letting that run its process, run its course, and then we would follow up with the qualitative, because that's going to take the most amount of time in terms of pulling different focus groups together, doing surveys, doing interviews, and then doing that analysis. So, we're kind of at the mercy of what, the task force is recommending, and then what the board would accept overall. And if the auditors would be willing to do such a hybrid process.
I'm just a single board member, but I from my sense of, reading the tea leaves from what was discussed on Tuesday, I think the board, or at least a quorum of the board, would be amenable to that type of a process. Is there any?
Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Thoughts from the committee. The board is certainly realizes that, while we're kind of the stewards of the public monies and everything else like that, we're not equity experts, and that's why we have an equity committee. So we're very, very, very interested in hearing what the committee has to say about the auditing process and the choice of auditor.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, I know with that public comment about the University of Illinois offering to give some, do some of this, I wonder, because I really did like the, it was Mr. Morris and the other guy, I can't remember his name, but I did like them. I think it was the Imperative Group. I really liked what they talked about, but I feel like they didn't have the experience with statistical analysis and things like that. And I feel like that's really what we need that as a component. So, I mean, has it been looked at that maybe, because I know like spending money on having 2 groups, kind of working with both. I don't know if like having the university help us with the statistical analysis of the data and then working with the Imperative Group on, some of the qualitative information, and then, going forward, like with PD and further consultation after that. I don't know.
I can only speak, I guess, to my personal opinion on that. I can't speak for the whole of the board, but there's a reason why we're asking for an external audit. We want some people, because people at the university may, there's likely a lot of our people from Urbana there, right? So we want a fresh set of eyes on this. If I'm hiring a roofer, I want a roofer who's done a roof before. If I'm hiring an equity auditor, I want somebody who's done an audit before as well. So I mean, while we have extraordinarily talented people at the university, and I think as a whole, we really should probably be reaching out to those talented folks more for this specific thing. I'd like to have some experience. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for my other board members.
I would echo that sentiment. We certainly have quite a few people that have a vested interest in kids and so forth in our district. And, I am definitely interested for this to be, a project that someone who has done this with districts before and has this experience. Again, I don't disagree that the university would do a great job at the mathematical side, the qualitative side, but I certainly want someone who knows exactly what to look for in this type of audit and can have a fresh set of completely non-biased eyes too on what is needed and what type of data should be pulled and just kind of the overall picture would be, you know, from someone who's not at all a part of this district. Again, you know, each board member has their own opinion on that.
I guess I'll throw in my opinion as well, not directly about whether the university is equipped to do it or not, but to speak to both of my colleagues who, you know, brought up the idea that we want somebody who has a lot of experience. And I'm going to speak to the third presenter from last night who, as Dr. Ivory Tatum stated, has not done an audit like this before. And I think that's really relevant to the conversation. If we're worried about somebody local who doesn't have experience, we should also be worried about a very expensive group who has told us that we haven't done this before. We really don't know what we're getting with them, but we do know that they haven't done it.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched those two presentations, I felt like Dr. Lewis had that experience, the statistical analysis. I mean, I agreed with the board's conversation after about that. I did really like Dr. Ivory Tatum talked about, you know, the professional development aspect and things after, you know, the last presenter just seemed like they had a lot of that experience, but they didn't have the experience with the audit piece, which is really what we're looking for right now. So that would be more Dr. Lewis, but I totally understand. And I mean, that makes total sense about the university. They have kids in the district, they live in Urbana, you know, so I think that we need that non-bias as well. So I hadn't thought of it that way. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree. The imperative really seemed to not have the experience with a large scale audit, but more of a study or just the research that they presented. And even with the professional development piece, even though that they spoke that that's kind of their area of expertise, they really didn't go into significant detail about that.
So a couple of thoughts that I have based on what I'm hearing is I guess I'd be very concerned about how this process works with somebody who's only going to do it remotely. And I think that is, I understand that there is a ton of things we can do remotely, especially now, but I think there's a huge component of this that does need to be face-to-face. And the other factor that I'd like us to continue to consider is a huge portion of our community is tied up in and a part of our dual language programming. And I want to make sure that whatever process we go through is able to capture the needs of that particular community in an authentic and effective way.
I'd just like to echo what Beth was saying. I mean, we have learned through this pandemic that technology is not equitable across our families. So if we are looking at doing small groups or asking parents to get on Zoom, you know, that is challenging for many of our families. And I think anyone that is only willing to do some of those focus groups via Zoom, which we don't know, which why I appreciate Dr. Kathy asking, you know, is something that for me, it's just not acceptable. We really do need someone who can go into the neighborhoods, meet our families, and really hear what they have to say. The other piece as well, I would really like to know from all three of these groups, their experience working with emergent bilingual students. You know, do they have an equitable lens on that population? Because that is a quarter of our population in our district.
I like to share some thoughts in looking at the three different vendors. I am in agreement with several others that the third group the third group that presented from the Chicago area just didn't have the experience. They've never, you know, they were very honest, and I was appreciative of that piece, that they were honest in saying, look, this is a proposal, but we've never done this before. I agree with others that have said that on the back end, the implementation side of actually coming in and maybe doing some of the work through curriculum and so forth, I think they probably would be great at. But I don't think they're, I can't say they're not going to be good at this audit, but I would not want to take a risk at the price tag that they have of us kind of being the guinea pig group for them. And so I kind of, in my mind of what I was thinking, had eliminated them and didn't really go any further in some of the pieces that I was looking at when looking at considerations. And so that left Dr. Lewis and Dr. Dubio for me. Of course, we've heard that Dr. Lewis is from North Carolina. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is a bad thing, but we do know that Dubio is right up the road in Illinois, and she's dealt with Illinois schools and she understands the state of Illinois. I thought that was a little bit of a plus for her in that respect. I looked at kind of the plan that they outlined to us, and on Dr. Lewis's side, he has a two-phase program or two-phase plan that he said would be done in 4 to 6 weeks total, which was really concerning for me that an audit of this type how it could even possibly be done in 4 to 6 weeks. I don't even know. That would be pretty amazing. Versus looking at Dr. Dubio, who's saying, this is a well thought out process. This is going to take us at least 9 months to do. And, while that's maybe a little bit longer, I think had we had some of these conversations and presentations in the very beginning, we would have been able to work this through this school year and be a little more successful with that. So it means that, we're going to probably be we're definitely going to be going into the next school year with this process. But it seems like a little bit more of an in-depth, real look and deep study of what's happening and has happened in our district, which is more attractive, even though it's a little bit longer. The price tags are close. I think Dr. Lewis was between 25 and 40,000. Dubio was like right at 41,000, I believe. So that is, comparable. When Dr. Caffey started talking about, some of the criteria that he looked at and, in selecting a firm, he talked about, number one, having that structure and the components that would include somebody who could come on site. He talked about the duration of it, how long is this going to last? How many other schools these individuals have, worked with that's comparable to our school district. And then the final report produced by the consultant. So those were the 5 things I remembered and I had wrote down in my notes. And so when I look at these 2 that are left, Dr. Lewis was lacking the plan to actually come to our campus. When he talked during the presentation, he said that during COVID, he's only been doing virtual. Now, that's not to say that he would not change his mind and agree to come to our district, but with the amount of groups that we likely need to have in place, I'm wondering whether that's gonna, if he does decide to go that route, if that's gonna considerably add to the price tag, because he would probably be expecting for us to pay for any and all trips for him and his staff to come to our facilities, versus the other group who actually met all 5 pieces of that criteria that was put forward, is right here in Illinois, and that price tag we know is built into what she's planning to do. So that was a piece I thought about. When we started talking to Dr. Lewis about the types of analysis that he would plan to do as a part of his coming to our district and looking at, our schools and so forth, the types of analysis to me, and maybe this is just me, I don't know, I can get pretty picky sometimes, but they seemed super basic to me. What he mentioned of the 3 types, so he told us about 3 types that he would do, and it was college prep courses and issues, around that, issues around disciplinary actions and trends. So looking at like trends by school, even to go as far as trends by teachers was another piece he mentioned around the disciplinary actions. And then his third piece was allocations of resources and how they're distributed throughout the district, like financial and human. And to me, that just seemed, I don't know, so basic, versus when I look at what Duvio presented, it's more extensive. She's looking at policies and procedures. She's looking at special education. She's looking at culturally responsive practices. She's looking at teaching and learning, including the curriculum, resources, instructional approaches. I mean, it just kind of, her list went on and on: academic programming, professional learning and growth. And so I felt like the package of what they would even be looking at in our district just was very different to me between the two groups. And then, I don't know, just overall, I felt like the district with Dr. Lewis might be doing a little bit more hand-holding, like he might need more for the district to do. And I heard him a lot say, well, it depends on what your expected outcomes are. And to me, I kind of more aligned with Dubio saying, not saying it depends on what your expected outcomes are, but of saying the expected outcomes of the equity audit is the development of a strategic, accountable, measurable, and sustainable action plan. She already knows, that this is what we need to do, versus him, it just kind of, I don't know, seemed to me like he was going to really be dependent on the district to give him a lot of guidance. There were a couple other key things that he mentioned that were a little concerning to me. At one point, I actually asked him to talk about the qualitative work. As many of you know, if you've ever looked at board meetings, I'm very passionate about the qualitative side because it tells you the why and gives you direction from the quantitative piece. So I'd asked him about, the qualitative work and what he would do, who he would be reaching out to as stakeholders. And what his response was, well, I would be working with board members and people in the school. And even if they want to make students available, I would work with students too. And I don't know, something about that just struck me wrong a little bit. I don't know why. But, when you look at Dubio again, she's telling us, she's like, hey, I need to work with teachers. I need to work with families. You need to identify people in the community. Student voice, climate, and culture is embedded in the framework of what we do. In other words, she's not going to be waiting on us to say, hey, our student voices are important, and yeah, we're going to provide you with students. But she's saying, no, students are required. They're a stakeholder. They have to be there. So I don't know, that kind of stuck out in my mind for some reason. And I'm trying to think of what else I had. I don't know, another thing that stuck out was, Dr. Lewis had mentioned, once we reach an agreement on the goals and outcomes, I'll ask you for what kind of data is needed. And that's typically okay. But what I really liked about the other presentation was, she basically said, we're going to assemble a group that's going to be a part of this process. And I'm actually going to provide you with a list of data considerations and deciding on what information we should gather. Of course, you can add to that, but you'll have about 30 different points of data that, I think you should consider. So in other words, she's coming to us with, hey, here are a bunch of things you should consider. There are probably some things we have not considered. And so I thought that was definitely a highlight versus, okay, what are your, what kind of information can I get from you? Just kind of my overall thoughts. I mean, obviously you can see that, I felt a little more strongly for Dubio and her group. The qualitative data, I think, is absolutely important. It's critical. You can't really, it's the formal look at the numbers and that data that kind of is describing, the variables and kind of examining the relationships between different types of variables. And quite honestly, I feel like we already know what these numbers are going to show. We already know that students of color are less in AP classes. We already know that the test scores for these students are low. We already know there's a disproportionate number of disciplinary actions for these students. You know, they may pull some other data, but quite honestly, I feel like what is produced is going to be what we already know. And that is why I think I feel so strongly about the qualitative side, is because that's going to be like that tool that you know is often not in the numbers. It's the exploratory research. It's that piece that helps us understand the reasons why these things are happening. It provides us with, you know, an insight into the problem, and then it basically develops ideas for us on where, you know, maybe some solutions may lie. And you know, of course, that can't be done without having that data, but I feel like the qualitative piece really is the meat of what we're doing here. It's what's gonna make our district not just say, okay, this is where we are, and some of these pieces are really bad, but to actually say, why is this happening and where do we go from here? So I know that was a little long, but those are just kind of my thoughts. I didn't really, you know, I think one of the disadvantages with Dubiel going in November is that it was in November, and you know, many people maybe didn't have notes or didn't have time to go back and relook at that presentation. I think, like some of the board members said, if you saw the presentation last night, you know, maybe it is a little bit of a disadvantage for her, or an advantage depending on your how you feel about her, that she actually does have some of her reports online. I think I would caution us to remember, and you know, I'm the daughter of a former superintendent, so I'm kind of in some of the, especially in some of the Chicago area politics where he was a portion of his time. I also understand that for some school districts, an equity audit is just a check on a sheet of things that they need to do. And they may not necessarily want you to report the way you would like to report. They may not give you the data that you really need. There are some cases where, you know, if you're good at reading between the lines, you can understand what happened in certain equity audits. And I also think it's important to know that in the equity audit arena and world, there are a lot of terms that are very common between equity auditors. And I think if you looked at several equity audits, you would find that a lot of them use some of the same terms. And so I know that was an argument at one point. I'm not going to say it's not valid, because everybody's opinion is valid to them. But I do think that some of that common language is just, it's common language, it's common responses that you would see in hundreds of equity audits if you had the opportunity to see them. So that's my opinion. I'm certainly a big girl, and I never have had an issue with agreeing to disagree. So I certainly don't want to overpower anybody's voice. Everybody has, you know, their opinions and their and who they would like to see. And so that's just me sharing me as an individual, and maybe not even as a board member, because I looked at this just as an individual in a district with an interest in, you know, us really moving forward with this being a good audit and not just a check on the list. So thank you.
Right. Anybody else? I'm really particularly interested in the non-board members. I'm sorry, Tori, but if people want to listen to board members talk, you know, there's hours of YouTube video up there for you.
And some people have chimed in on the chat too, Paul. So like Katie mentioned, the qualitative part is really important to her. Beth made a comment about how important the qualitative piece is too, and how it might be hard to bridge if we went with the hybrid model. And Tom and Lupe kind of chimed in and wondered about that too. So
I think that Paul makes a really good point, that meaning that I just, you know, the district administrative team, Dr. Ivory Tatum's team, likely, you know, board members, I don't think want to hear what we have to say either, no offense, but I think that committee members have a huge voice right now and really want to be heard. I think the board members will have a, you know, kind of a recommendation to Dr. Ivory Tatum, to Dr. Cappy, and they want to hear what you have to say. So some of the very small sentences in the chat, I think that people have more feelings about those, and I think that the board would want to hear them. So Paul, if I misspoke, let me know, but that's what I think you were getting at.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll just mention some thoughts that I'm having, since I'm one of the people maybe that you were referencing, not a board member. Just listening to all of you speak tonight, I hadn't ever thought about the things that Lupe shared from some of our communities that may not have such a voice if we, use different whoever, but however, whichever group we use, I want to make sure that all of the communities in our district are represented in this audit, and that it's not only one group of people that are always giving their opinions on things. And I feel like that often tends to happen here. And then the other part was that I said I agreed with Tori that qualitative data is important to me, because I just don't think that numbers can give us a whole picture of what's happening in a community, because we're human beings and we can't all be represented by numbers. And so qualitative information is really important to me, I think, in the end result of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I agree that the qualitative is important. I'm a little concerned and hesitant as we talk about statistics, because when the reports are finished, right, we have to be able to work with this document. So, and the people who are going to be working with it and using that information to guide decisions within buildings are not statisticians, that are not versed in statistics like the people who are running the reports are, right? So while I see there's a valid use in having that, if we're running really complex statistics, I see the value in that. But when we start putting boots on the ground and trying to implement the plans, we want to make sure that the quantitative data we have is actionable and understandable to everyone who's at the table.
Yeah, and I think that would also make it hard to have like two separate groups, because I mean, I just feel like that, and then I worry about the cost of that as well. So I feel like we need to pick one that we're comfortable with. And I liked that Tori went back to kind of those 5 points that Dr. Caffey, that kind of, I mean, there's a lot of things that got jogged in my memory about things we've already talked about, or, it was in November when Dr. Dubio presented and all that. So I feel like going with one person is probably important, looking at those 5 goals of what this audit is, but I also think it has to be a balance between the quantitative and the qualitative, just because of all of the different groups, that all the stakeholders. And then I also think that it has to be that DL piece, the fourth of a population that is involved in the dual language program, and not being native English speakers, that has to be definitely a big part of this as well. So
I agree. I want to add, Beth made a comment in the chat that I agree with wholeheartedly. I think the hard part about doing it, having 2 separate groups, which is what Trisha's saying, is the qualitative helps us understand the numbers and vice versa. So when we get those numbers through a quantitative study, the qualitative stories and people's experiences is what will help those numbers make sense. So it will be hard, I think, to have one person doing, running all the focus groups and pulling all that data together with us, and then somebody else crunching the numbers. And I think Dr. Lewis, yes, he only talked about certain those low-hanging fruit areas that we all know about. We know that you know, all the things he talked about are areas in our district that we have concerns about. That's why we want to do an audit. So we would have to kind of provide all the additional numbers and data, which we're going to talk about when we get to the 5 labs. We have a lot of those areas that we're trying to target beyond just those low-hanging fruit kinds of things. But again, it would be hard to be sending him data and saying, here's, you know, here are all these areas, and then somebody else kind of, you know, parallel hearing all the stories and talking about why I'm not in AP and why I'm not motivated to this and why I'm dropping out, when someone else is then crunching the numbers as to, oh, here's your dropout rate, but not having the stories. So I do think it'll be hard to do 2 different things, but, and that was kind of what Beth's comment was. I agree to that, with that.
Right. Does anyone else like to chime in? This isn't going to be our last opportunity to talk about this. So, you know, instead of hearing, you know, administrators and board members kind of talk about their perceptions on the night, I would really hope that everybody takes the time to go through the meeting that's up on YouTube and watch it for yourselves. So you can hear the discussion, you can hear the reports, you can hear most importantly, the questions. I thought the questions were really good and the answers were really good from the team. So you can kind of get an idea, you know, of what was said that night, and then we might inform some of your opinions as well. So please take that time. But if there's anything else you'd like to talk about with regards to this discussion, please speak up now.
Well, I think I'll just conclude with this, is that I will just do my due diligence to speak with Dr. Lewis about his availability to even come on site and to address some of those issues that have been raised tonight in terms of having boots on the ground and touching all of the members in our community that we feel is important for him to, you know, have those touch points with. I will also broach the conversation just so we know if it would even be possible to do a hybrid with both Dr. Lewis and Dr. Dubiel, because it may be something that neither one of them would even want to consider, which means that we would have to just consider one consultant and then move forward.
Yep. Thank you. That's necessary legwork.
So timing wise, we don't meet again until March 31st, which is, you know, it feels like a long time from now for our next meeting, because spring break kind of falls right in the middle of March. And I'm trying to read the chat comments too. So I wonder about waiting that long, if Dr. Caffey is able to, because yeah, I don't want to wait. I mean, then we'll be making a decision at the end of March and not doing anything. And we've basically lost 4th quarter too if we don't make some decisions by April. So maybe what we'll do is, if hopefully, I kind of saw a lot of people nodding and referencing the video. So I think most of you maybe watched the YouTube and reread some of the materials. But if you didn't, like Paul said, please take a few minutes to do that and share your thoughts with the group or with Dr. Caffey and I. We'd be happy to take those via email or however you want to send them. But maybe what we can do is try to get another meeting. I know when we do the doodle polls, it's really, really hard to get all of us in one spot. But if Dr. Caffey has an update where he can come and share, you know, more about the hybrid, if we get more information about Dr. Lewis, that we can bring back prior to March 31st or prior to spring break would be great. Early March, and we can put some dates out there and see if we can get at least the majority of the group to hop into a Zoom and kind of hear that update. Does that sound like that would work for people? Okay. I know it'll be hard to find another date and get another meeting scheduled, but I do, just in the interest of time and not losing the rest of the school year, it'd be great if, even if we don't make a decision until April, we at least have an opportunity to get the auditor here, have them come in person, have them join our group so we can talk with them, have them just get a understanding of Urbana, and that maybe could be some early work could happen 4th quarter with that person would be ideal timing wise. Other comments or questions or people's thoughts about that?
This is Joe. Could I ask a real quick
Yep.
clarifying question? So
Yeah.
I still need to continue to go back and watch from the meetings on Tuesday and refresh my memory, especially also now with Dr. Duyel's proposal. Could you remind me where I can find her most recent, just so I can go back since it's been since November?
Yep. So Dr. Kathy sent that today. So yesterday I sent, yep. So he sent a memo, which we'll put online, but then he also sent her PowerPoint from November and her proposal sheets. Yep.
Thank you. I was just looking at the most recent ones. I didn't realize hers was in there too.
Hers was separate. Yeah. He sent a
okay.
separate email. So that's from, yep.
Yeah. And then her presentation to the board meeting should also be available on YouTube as well, which.
Yes, I can share that link. We can send the YouTube for that.
And the only thing I would add right now, which is why I want to go back and reanalyze her proposal, because I'm more familiar with her work historically and with equity audits, which has always been very positive work with her work. So I just wanted to go back and refresh my memory in terms of the explicits of her proposal. But based on what I've heard and my own line of thinking in regards to what she would bring through her proposal, from what I remember, and the previous work that I've done at the state level, and her work has been referenced, and I've been at different committee meetings where I've seen her present before. I've always been very impressed with the type of work that she and has done historically. And so I was going to ask if there's a way for us to reconnect before the end of March, because I want to take a little bit of time personally to review all of the proposals than what I've done so far.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. I agree, Joe. I made that comment last night. I mean, I think that the comment was made last night that we only brought one person to this group and didn't have you guys vet like multiple auditors. And it was because we also are familiar with Dr. Dubiel's work. I mean, I've heard her name on several state board committees. She facilitates a couple state board committees. So she is very involved in the emergent bilingual community for the state. She has done a lot of equity, led a lot of equity steering like groups through the state board too. So in addition to her work with school districts. Okay.
I guess does anybody else wish to comment on 5.1 at this time? Basically on the process of choosing a consulting firm?
I had a quick question.
Sure.
So with their action steps or like implementation of actions after they get all the data, did anybody ask how that works? Do they walk through us or through that process with us, or is it just the list of action steps that we need to take and it's up to us to implement that?
That's a great segue, Sherry, to our next item on the agenda, actually. So I think whatever auditor we work with, again, we're going to be kind of the district leadership team that they will come to our group when they need information, when they need to start doing some comparative analyses and things like that. We'll be the group that will work with them as they crunch the numbers. I think a lot of it, if I'm heard Dr. Lewis's process would happen just with the auditor. Like we'll provide all the data and then they will do kind of the data analysis piece and then be coming back with us and checking in with us, I think. One thing that I wanted to mention related to 5.2, which is why that is on the agenda. So once we secure the auditor and once we have a person that we're working with and they're off again, like Brian put in the chat, it'll take them 4 to 6 weeks, several weeks for them to do their data piece, which means then we're not probably going to be meeting as a group. So what would happen is we'll meet, we'll make this decision, the board will vote, and we'll approve a proposal and an amount that we're going to pay someone. And then the group will, I don't know what's a good word, go on hiatus, so to speak. So I think we'll kind of call you guys to back together when the auditor needs us, or when the auditor has a specific need for data or a specific activity for us to do as a group. But otherwise, we wouldn't probably be meeting monthly until we get to the point where we have a concrete, some concrete data, qualitative and quantitative, to look at, so we can then start setting goals. So I know we have meetings scheduled for the rest of the year, March, April, possibly May if needed. We may or may not need those meetings. Once we secure somebody, we may not need to meet in April because they may be off kind of doing their thing. I imagine we will need to meet because we'll need to give them some direction, and they'll probably have a lot of questions around what data pieces and where our data lives, and we're going to look at that a little bit when we get in 5 labs here in a few minutes. But I think there may be times where we have a meeting schedule where we won't meet if it's not a good use of your time and the auditor doesn't need us at that point. And there may be, just like I'm asking you to clear a schedule maybe for an additional meeting that isn't on our calendar, there may be a time when they really need something time sensitive, and I may have to come back to you and say, hey, the auditor really needs to have a check-in with us. And then we might send something out like we have been and say who's available to kind of meet with them. So I think our schedule for the rest of the year may be in flux a little bit, so I just wanted to put that out. I also know we have a lot of parents in the group, so there will be times, I think, as a district leadership team where we might be sharing, like tonight, we're going to go in the closed session and be looking at student level data and some data that, one, shouldn't be shared publicly, and then two, that is a little difficult, to be talking about specific teachers or specific classes or courses that are taught where people's names and personal information might be shared. So there'll be times where maybe it won't be relevant for a parent to be part of the group for that meeting. And there will be times that we won't be able to talk about some of that data analysis publicly. So I just want that. So that is basically what I wanted to share with the group about 5.2. But did I answer your question, Sherry? Okay. So Beth, I'm reading your comment. You want to say it out loud? So I'm trying to.
You want me to say it out loud? So
yeah, I'm trying to get to what you're.
Yeah, so North Carolina doesn't allow teacher bargaining units. And so I do feel like any recommendations that come from an equity audit will go through the lens of our union. And I think that he may have lots of experience in that, but I think that's just something I keep in mind, having worked for people who are from non-union states.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. That's a good point.
It is. That'd be a relevant question for Dr. Caffey to take back to Dr. Lewis, is how much experience he has working with districts that have unionized staff.
It was just something that was said at some point in his presentation or tonight that made me wonder about that. And having been in a place where working with people who don't work with unions frequently, I think there is a disconnect at times between what how you implement things with a union and how you implement them when you don't have a union. And again, it's just a different perspective, but I Googled it tonight to find out about North Carolina based on something that was said. So.
And that was also brought up at the board meeting. I know that after Dr. Lewis's presentation, there were some board members really enthusiastic based on the quantitative data that he was able to present, even talking about being able to find data about specific teachers. And since this was a good segue, I do think that our UEA would find issue in drilling it down to a specific teacher even though we're able to see that data, just that is going to cause some pause, I think, from our UEA.
And Brian just added, he's actually from Louisiana, but a lot of the work he talked about was relevant to North Carolina. So
He works in North Carolina.
Yeah, but Brian
I know-
added, he's from
yeah.
Louisiana.
Sorry to interrupt, and I know I don't want board members hijacking the whole conversation. I'm just getting bothered by the fact that there are a lot of open-ended questions that are not answerable in this space. And it's really important at this level of spending and this important task that we really know who this man is before we make assumptions about what he can and cannot do. So he has a lot of work experience. He talked a lot about all of his teaching experience, all of his early work was in Louisiana. Yes, he lives in North Carolina now. He also was in Colorado, simply because I've lived in Illinois only 11 years. The entire rest of my life was in a different state, and all of what I know is from a different state. So people have histories. We need to make sure we know what he can and cannot do. And we do have more information about Dubiel, absolutely, because she's local. Again, I don't want to go on a rant here. Let's make sure we have the facts about what he can and cannot do and what he knows before we make a decision.
Sure. Thanks for that, Brian. So Dr. Caffey, I think, is going to, somebody wanted to comment before I go.
I was just going to add, yeah, it was me, Jennifer. I was going to add into that as well. I'm sorry, my child is in her karate class in the background. That when we think about, what our vendors can and cannot do, I do also want to just add on that while the data analytics I value, I do think that a data focused assessment is absolutely needed, but that mixed methods is extremely important to me because when, specifically working on some of the data committees that I'm on in the district, thinking about how we need to differentiate the assessments and the data for some of our populations. So numbers, you can't compare apples to oranges when you're looking at numbers. You have to know what those numbers mean within the context of who the population that's being represented by those numbers. So I think with any of our vendor, if we're looking at someone who's more focused just on data or more focused just on the qualitative piece, we have to understand that they go hand in hand if you really want a clear picture. One of the things that was brought up at the board meeting was looking at dual language data and how that data looks. So I just want to make sure that whatever vendor that's looking at that dual language data really understands what those numbers mean in that context.
Yeah, good point. And I think what Lupe is saying too is state to state, different assessments look very different. Is that what you're kind of alluding to? What assessments what data we might have here in Illinois might look really different or might not even be something that's offered in other states. I don't want to interpret for you.
I think not just the assessment type, but also the method or the results based on who is actually taking the assessment. For example, a third grade, let's just say IAR assessment. The results there for a dual language class are going to look very different for a monolingual English class. So as long as the vendor has an understanding of what they're looking at and the entire whole picture of what realistic expectations are, what, a language analysis over time looks for our emergent bilinguals, and doesn't just say, well, this third grade dual language class is performing poorly. But why are they performing? That's why I'm saying that qualitative piece makes a huge difference, because the why behind it is just as important as the result.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, so Dr. Caffey, you have your list of follow-ups and things that you're going to ask Dr. Lewis and kind of your homework, and then we'll try to find a time to get everybody back together before March 31st.
Yeah, absolutely. I have my marching orders. And again, I'll just say this, if necessary, because I know there's a lot of questions on the table, probably for both, like the two leading consultants at this point in time, we can always invite them back to do a second presentation if necessary, just so we can make sure that we're being as thorough and vetting them again, so everyone's comfortable with whoever we decide to go with. So we don't have to rush, but we do need to make a decision. I'll keep reiterating that, but we can invite them back to make a second presentation if necessary.
You know what? I really like that idea. I know we haven't talked about that, but now since you said that, I mean, I think, to be honest, there were a lot of questions that were asked of the two presenters on Tuesday night that no one asked Dr. Dubiel. A lot of the things that came up after her presentation, you know, kind of questioning her proposals and questioning some of her data analyses. I don't think we ever gave her an opportunity. We didn't ask her those questions at the board meeting or when she was in this space. So I do think there were things that Dr. Lewis was able to answer and speak to that she wasn't asked. So I'm glad you said that. I think that is something we should think about. Okay, well, I've already kind of covered 5.2, which was the schedule for future meetings. We were going to kind of go into our breakouts. I'm looking at time. We have about 20 minutes. So Tanya, I'm going to kind of pivot here a little bit. We were going to go into breakouts and talk about the areas from our January agenda. We were going to look at attendance, activities, IP, discipline, but I'm kind of thinking, and that's not going to be possible to do in 20 minutes.
Correct.
And we've already given you, yeah, I don't think so either. And we've given you kind of that overview of 5 labs before. So tonight we were going to kind of dig a little deeper, go in and break into groups. And actually we had 2 questions we were going to look at. We were going to review some very specific data. And I'm going to say this for Christy Lee because she's not here, but I know she wanted to make sure that she just wanted it back on the table. She said this with the group. She's teaching a class now on Thursday nights, so she's not been able to join us. But she did email me today, like that we're not just looking at GRACE. And I think that has been a concern of hers. And when we look at our data that we were going to dig into, we are looking way deeper and more in depth in race. So we were going to look at special ed status, students with limited English, so our emergent bilinguals, just kind of beyond just race, ethnicity, gender, income level, all those things. So we were going to actually specifically go into some of those groups in breakouts, but I don't want to not do that activity justice. We were going to talk about some identified strengths and some areas that we know are in need of improvement. And I think this is a good activity for us to do as a group because we know our auditor is going to come back to us and say, hey, Urbana, what are the things you guys are doing well and where are the areas you need improvement? So we need to do this activity, but we can't do it in 20 minutes. So I think I am going to make an executive decision here, and Brandon, you can jump in and say, maybe we can table this. Our poor facilitators, Lupe, Kim, I know you guys have been anxious to do this for the last 2 meetings. John, who else? Tanya. So I think we'll hold on to that because we won't be able to get very deep in 15, 20 minutes. I don't know what the people who were going to facilitate the activity, what are your thoughts?
I agree, and we're ready to go whenever, but I don't think that there's anything that's going to change right now tonight. So,
Right. Now, I think the conversation that we had tonight has been key and very important. And our numbers that's something that will always be there. It's getting that qualitative feedback that we prioritize, and we want to get that without a rush.
and I would add, if anybody is really anxious to look at some of the 5 labs data, please stop by either me or Tanya's office. We'd be happy to just kind of walk through that with you in a more one-on-one environment.
Okay, well, with that being said, and that being the end of our agenda, I think unless there are other questions, comments, Kim, I know you just kind of hopped back in, did you want to add anything, Kim?
I don't think so. Sorry, I got kicked off there for just a second.
Okay.
No, I think I'm okay. I heard the last part as far as going into breakouts, and then we'll go into that a little more deeply.
Okay. So unless other people have any other comments, I think then we probably could adjourn a few minutes early, or anybody else have any? Okay.
Is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second.
Just do this by acclamation. Is there any objection to adjourning right now? All right, hearing none, that's it for our meeting tonight. Thank you very, very much, anyone. This has been extraordinarily informative.
Thanks, everybody. We'll send you the November YouTube link. I think that is probably the only thing you're missing at this point. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Stay warm tomorrow.